ever get kind of caught in the middle of that whole fitness debate? You know, the
Yeah.
one about bodybuilding versus functional training.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's got such strong opinions,
Yeah.
and it can be tough to sort through it all.
It really can. Yeah, it's almost like two separate worlds sometimes, right?
Exactly. And speaking of strong opinions, you actually sent over some really fascinating stuff on this, an article by Tom Venuto.
Oh, yeah, Tom Venuto.
And he's been a major figure in both the bodybuilding world and the wider fitness industry for like forever. So he's got this incredible perspective on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, for sure. He's seen it all, right from the hardcore bodybuilding scene to the rise of functional training in mainstream gyms.
Totally. So for this deep dive, we're going to use Venuto's article as our guide to really unpack this whole thing.
Awesome. Sounds good.
What are these training styles actually all about at their core? Are they really as opposed to each other as some people make it seem?
Yeah, and the big question for our listeners, people like you who want to look good, feel strong, and stay injury-free,
What's the real takeaway here?
exactly what does it all mean for you and your training?
Okay, so let's break it down first things first. When Venuto talks about bodybuilding training, what's he really getting at?
Well, he's very clear about this bodybuilding at its purest is all about cosmetics.
Cosmetics, huh?
Yep, the end goal, the ultimate measure of success is the visual appearance of the physique.
So we're talking about that classic low body fat, high muscle mass kind of look.
Exactly. It's all about maximizing muscle size symmetry, getting that shredded look, the kind of physique you see on a bodybuilding stage.
Right, and it's interesting because he points out that the actual methods you use to get there aren't really judged in competition.
Right. It doesn't matter if you're using heavy weights, light weights, slow reps, fast reps, whatever gets you those results is fair game.
So it's all about that final visual product.
Yeah. And he even quotes one functional training expert who kind of humorously, but also kind of pointedly, describes bodybuilding as walking across a stage and selectively spasming muscles to their favorite tune.
Oh, wow, that quote really highlights the contrast, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does in a pretty stark way.
So on the flip side, when we talk about functional training, what's the core idea there, according to Venuto?
Well, functional training comes from a totally different world. It grew out of sports conditioning and rehabilitation.
Makes sense.
So the focus here is on exercises that make you better at real-life activities and sports movements, both in terms of efficiency and safety.
Okay, so give me some examples.
Sure, think about being able to lift heavy grocery bags or furniture without hurting your back.
Yeah.
Or navigating uneven terrain when you're hiking, or keeping up with your kids without getting totally winded, or improving your golf swing or your jump shot, things like that.
So it's all about making those everyday movements and athletic skills smoother, stronger, safer.
Exactly. It's about training for real-life performance, not just aesthetics.
Okay, so we've got aesthetics versus practical application and athletic performance. It seems like this fundamental difference in goals is where some of the tension between these two approaches comes from.
Absolutely. And Venuto doesn't shy away from describing some of the pretty harsh criticism he's heard from certain strength and athletic coaches. They can be quite dismissive of bodybuilding training.
Yeah, I've heard some of that too.
Right. They'll say things like machines are a waste of time, or exercises like the leg press are totally non-functional. And they'll even go as far as to say that bodybuilders are all show and big, slow, weak, stiff, bloated, useless muscles.
Ouch, that's got to sting a little.
Yeah, and he even quotes one statement that's particularly cutting. The worst thing to ever happen to strength training was bodybuilding.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty direct attack.
It is, and you can understand why someone who's dedicated to bodybuilding might feel a little defensive hearing that.
Totally, because their traditional methods have been all about building visible muscle,
Yeah.
using techniques that deliver those eye-catching results.
Right, and they often rely on machines and isolation exercises to really target and sculpt specific muscles.
Which, again, is totally valid for their specific goal.
Exactly. For building that stage-ready physique, their approach absolutely works.
But then Venuto starts talking about how functional training started to spread beyond the world of elite athletes and rehab clinics.
Right. He observed it really making its way into regular gyms, with trainers increasingly using tools like medicine balls, stability balls, resistance bands, stuff that wasn't traditionally part of the bodybuilding world.
He even describes this kind of funny scene of doing a gym inspection at this fancy white glove type of place.
Yeah.
And he sees a trainer doing squats on a stability ball while holding a medicine ball.
Wow.
It's like a picture of how things were changing, right?
Definitely. It was a far cry from the rows of weight machines and barbells he was used to.
Totally. He also mentioned seeing things like lunges and leg presses being done off foam pads and all sorts of twisting movements with medicine balls.
It sounds like a completely different approach to training.
Right, and he admits he was a little skeptical at first, but then a couple of things really made him pay attention.
What were the...
Well, firstly, he noticed that the trainers who were using these functional training methods seemed to have much better client retention.
Interesting. So people were actually sticking with their programs.
Yeah, and maybe even more surprisingly, their clients seemed to be having more fun.
Huh. That's a big deal, right? Because if you don't enjoy your workouts, you're less likely to stick with them.
Exactly. And then there was this specific example that really caught his eye.
I'm curious. Tell me about that.
So there was this trainer who was demonstrating some pretty impressive feats of strength, like doing one-arm dumbbell presses with a 110-pound dumbbell on a stability ball
Wow.
and incline pressing 120s on a regular bench. And the thing is, this guy wasn't even a bodybuilder.
So he wasn't built like the stereotypical massive bodybuilder, but he was still incredibly strong.
Exactly. And that's what really got Venuto thinking. If someone without that classic bodybuilder physique could achieve that kind of strength through these more functional methods, maybe there's something there that could benefit even hardcore bodybuilders.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Totally. So the big question Venuto tackles is, can bodybuilders actually benefit from incorporating functional training into their routines?
Yeah, and what's the verdict?
Well, based on his experience and research, he comes down pretty firmly on the side of yes.
Really?
Yeah, he argues that functional training can actually be a valuable tool for bodybuilders in a few key ways.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so firstly, it can help address and strengthen those weak links that a lot of bodybuilders tend to develop.
Weak links. What do you mean by that?
So think about things like imbalances in posture. Maybe one shoulder sits higher than the other, or their gait pattern is a little off, or they have weaknesses in those smaller stabilizing muscles.
Yeah, those muscles that often get overlooked when you're focused on moving really heavy weight in isolation.
Exactly. And over time, those imbalances can lead to injuries.
Right, because you could have incredibly developed prime movers, like huge pecs, for example.
Yeah.
But if the smaller muscles that stabilize your shoulder joint are weak, you're setting yourself up for trouble down the road.
Precisely. And secondly, Venuto suggests that functional training can actually help bodybuilders break through those frustrating strength plateaus.
How so?
Well, by doing more integrated whole body movements, they can make steady gains in their overall strength and power.
Okay, but increased maximal strength isn't really the primary goal for bodybuilders, right?
True, but it can indirectly contribute to their ability to lift heavier in their hypertrophy-focused training later on.
So it's like building a stronger foundation that allows them to build even bigger muscles later on.
Exactly. It's not about abandoning those core bodybuilding principles, but rather adding a layer of functional strength that can actually support and enhance their physique development and keep them training hard for longer.
I like that idea, building a more resilient body.
Now, what about the other way around? Can athletes whose main goal is performance benefit from incorporating bodybuilding-style training?
That's a great question, and Venuto does acknowledge that there are certain situations where bodybuilding training can be useful for athletes.
Okay, like when...
Well, particularly when they need to add a significant amount of muscle mass as part of a periodized training plan.
So, for example, if a smaller athlete needs to bulk up to better compete in their sport.
Exactly. A strategically implemented bodybuilding-style program could be beneficial during specific phases of their training.
So just to clarify for our listeners, when we talk about periodized training, we're talking about a structured training plan that cycles through different phases with different goals and intensities.
Right. So there might be a phase focused on building strength, another on building endurance, and another on peaking for competition.
Got it. But Venuto also points out the limitations of a purely bodybuilding approach for most athletes, right?
Absolutely. He's very clear about that.
What are those limitations?
Well, that typical bodybuilding style with its controlled tempo and often longer time under tension isn't really ideal for developing the explosiveness, speed, and raw power that most athletes need.
Right, because athletes need that lightning-fast coordination between their nervous system and their muscles, that neuromuscular integration, and the ability to quickly recruit those fast-twitch muscle fibers for explosive movements.
Exactly. And bodybuilding, with its focus on isolating muscles and using machines, might not always train those crucial elements effectively.
He even quotes the saying, train slow, get slow, which really drives that point home.
It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, because if you're always training with slow, controlled movements, you might not develop that same level of explosiveness.
Right. And athletes need to activate those stabilizing muscles and develop that coordinated movement, the kind of full body integration that lets them perform at their best.
And a purely bodybuilding-focused routine with its emphasis on isolation and machines can sometimes neglect those areas.
Exactly. It's not always the most effective way to optimize athletic function and prevent injuries on the field or court.
So while building muscle can be beneficial for some athletes, the way they go about it matters.
Absolutely. The methods have to align with their specific goals.
Okay, so this brings us to the idea of finding a middle ground, strategically integrating functional training principles into a bodybuilding routine.
hmm
What does Venuto recommend for bodybuilders who want to do that?
He's got some pretty specific suggestions.
Awesome, lay them on me.
Okay, so first he emphasizes doing more unsupported exercises.
Like standing exercises instead of sitting or lying on a bench.
Exactly. He even tells this story about recovering from a back injury and initially doing a lot of supported exercises on machines, thinking that would be easier on his back.
Right.
But he later realized that it actually hindered his full recovery because it wasn't properly engaging his core and stabilizer muscles.
Interesting. So it's like those machines were doing too much of the work for him.
Yeah, and by relying on them too much, he wasn't fully rehabilitating those crucial supporting muscles.
So getting off the machines and using free weights where you have to control your own stability becomes super important.
Absolutely. And it makes sense, right? If you're doing a dumbbell bicep curl while standing, your core has to work much harder to keep you balanced than if you're sitting on a bench with your back supported.
Totally. It's like the difference between driving a car with power steering and trying to steer a car without it.
Good analogy. You really feel the smaller muscles working.
Okay, what else does he recommend?
He also suggests incorporating the stability ball into workouts.
Really?
Yeah, and he admits he was initially hesitant about it, maybe even a little self-conscious about trying it out when nobody was watching.
You can kind of picture that.
But he came around to seeing the benefits, especially for core strength. And the fact that it provides this novel stimulus to the muscles, which can actually lead to new muscle growth as your body adapts to that unstable environment.
Interesting. So it's like challenging your body in a new way that forces it to adapt.
And it can be really effective.
What about ab training? Any specific advice there?
He advocates for a more balanced approach. So while he doesn't completely dismiss traditional isolation exercises like crunches, he suggests that bodybuilders often overdo them.
Yeah, I could see that.
And he thinks they should also include more integrated rotational movements like Russian twists and wood chops.
Okay, but I've also heard that weighted side bends can be bad for your obliques and mess up that V-taper look.
You've heard right. He specifically cautions against doing too many heavy-weighted side bends for that exact reason.
So it's all about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Not going overboard with any one type of movement.
Brad, anything else?
He's also a big proponent of unilateral dumbbell work. Exercises where you're working one arm or one leg at a time.
Right, like lunges or single arm rows.
Exactly. And this forces greater stabilization and engages your core more effectively. He even quotes the famous strength coach, Charles Poliquin, who considered dumbbell work the foundation of strength.
So it's really about shifting that emphasis away from machines and towards exercises where you're in control of the weight and your body has to work harder to stabilize. Exactly. And he also advises generally prioritizing free weights over machines while acknowledging that machines have their place, for isolating specific muscles or working around injuries.
Right.
He generally favors free weights because they tend to be more functional. They require more involvement from those stabilizer muscles, and they promote more natural movement patterns.
Makes sense. And finally, he reminds us about the importance of those big compound multi-joint exercises.
Oh, yeah, those are crucial.
Like squats, deadlifts, presses, rows.
All the classics.
Even for bodybuilders who are prepping for competition.
Yeah, because they're so foundational for building overall strength, muscle mass, power, and yes, functionality.
Even within the context of wanting to look a certain way.
Exactly. And all of these recommendations really point towards this idea of a more comprehensive and well-rounded training approach for bodybuilders.
One that doesn't ditch their aesthetic goals entirely,
Right.
but strategically incorporates elements that make them stronger, more resilient, and less prone to injury.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Venuto brings it all back to one fundamental principle, clarity of purpose.
Okay, let's unpack that. What does he mean by clarity of purpose?
He's basically saying that a lot of the confusion and debate about different training styles just melts away when you're crystal clear about what you're actually trying to achieve.
Why are you training? What are your specific goals?
Exactly, because once you know that you can start making informed decisions about which exercises and training styles are going to be most effective for you.
He also points out that bodybuilders have their own set of valid training concepts.
Mm.
Things like the mind-muscle connection and really feeling the muscle work.
Yeah. Which might seem a little woo-woo to some people.
Right, especially those strength coaches who are all about objective performance metrics.
But those subjective sensations are actually really important tools for bodybuilders. They're part of how they achieve their aesthetic goals. It's part of their definition of performance.
So for a bodybuilder, performance is ultimately about how they look on stage, the visual impact they create.
Exactly. Whereas for an athlete, performance is about speed, power, agility, their ability to execute those sport-specific skills.
And both need to train in a way that aligns with their individual definitions of performance.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So Venuto's ultimate conclusion is that while strength and power are wrong, athletes should primarily train like athletes, and bodybuilders should primarily train like bodybuilders.
Right. Horses for courses, as they say.
Exactly. Functional training isn't the enemy of bodybuilding. In fact, it can be a really valuable tool for helping bodybuilders address imbalances, prevent injuries, and even enhance their muscle development over the long term by building a more robust physique.
Makes you rethink the whole debate, doesn't it?
Totally. So to sum it all up for you, the listener, bodybuilding and functional training have different primary goals:
Yeah.
aesthetics versus practical performance.
Right. Two different paths with two different destinations.
And while some strength and athletic coaches might criticize bodybuilding's purely cosmetic focus, it's a perfectly valid and effective approach for achieving a certain look.
Absolutely. If that's your goal, bodybuilding methods work.
However, bodybuilders can get some serious benefits by adding in some functional exercises to strengthen those underlying weaknesses and potentially bust through training plateaus.
And on the flip side, while athletes might use some bodybuilding principles for adding muscle mass, their training should mainly focus on enhancing functionality and sport-specific movements.
Right.
Got to train for what you want to be good at.
Exactly. And ultimately, the most important thing is to have a clear understanding of your own fitness goals and then choose the training methods that support those goals.
Makes total sense.
So this brings us to a question for you, the listener.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Are you primarily focused on achieving those aesthetic goals or building functional strength for everyday life and activities? Or maybe it's a bit of both for you.
It's probably a combination for a lot of people.
Yeah, and how might this deeper understanding of bodybuilding and functional training and how they can actually work together,
Yeah.
how might that inform the choices you make in your own training to help you get where you want to go?
Because at the end of the day, it's all about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of bodybuilding and functional strength training.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation.
Hopefully, by exploring Tom Venuto's insights, we've given you a clearer picture of these different approaches, the distinctions, the potential conflicts, and most importantly, how they can actually complement each other to help you reach your fitness goals.
And maybe even spark some new ideas for your own training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We encourage you to keep thinking about how these ideas apply to your own fitness journey and what other questions this might have raised for you.
Yeah, keep exploring, keep experimenting, keep pushing yourself.
And most importantly, keep having fun with it.
Absolutely. Fitness should be enjoyable.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of fitness and performance.
Can't wait.